Yeah.
It's Latin for many.
Tick.
They'll suck your blood. They'll suck
Politics.
your blood.
This is coming from MSN.com, mirrored from The Guardian. Headline, White House says Biden refining plans for all scenarios over Ukraine, Russia. Live, it says. Live, updated. President to hold video call with European leaders over escalating crisis. Follow all the day's politics news. Biden has finished his call with European leaders on the crisis in Ukraine, which the White House says lasted more than an hour. Woo! I had a very, very, very good meeting. Total unanimity with all the European leaders. We'll talk about it later. The
Interesting.
president.
Sorry to cut you off.
Okay. Do you have a difference?
Yeah, it's
You don't
different.
have the updated version pulled up.
I
probably.
don't, but my version has live updated at 1933. And
Oh,
all
nice.
the quotes start at 1933, interestingly enough.
Fun.
Let me
Well,
refresh.
I'm doing updates. They start at 2235.
Okay.
So a lot has happened since we started the show.
Here we go, 2235. Okay.
Yeah. So great quote from the president. I had a very, very, very good meeting. The president told CNN's chief White House correspondent the U.S. had placed 8,500 troops on heightened alert to deploy to Europe as NATO reinforced its eastern borders with warships and fighter jets. There are growing fears of a possible lightning attack by Russia to seize the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, which is apparently what we're supposed to call it now, Kyiv. More details.
It's not Kiev?
I've always called it Kiev.
Yeah.
But everybody in the mainstream has been calling it Kyiv. I guess, yeah.
Somebody
don't know.
can tell us who knows better.
Let's see here. An update on 2225. Hi, all. Sam Levin in Los Angeles here, taking over our live coverage for the rest of the day. Okay.
All
so
right,
this is-
Sam Levin, you're in the saddle. Let's go.
Yeah. Just a
Let's
little.
do it.
Little waving of the hi, I'm Sam Levin. This is me now. A prosecutor has alleged that. Whoa, yeah, what?
What is this about?
What? Sam Levin, why are you updating us on Michael Avenatti
And Stormy Daniels.
and Stormy Daniels?
some bring back some old Trump stuff. What?
This is just like a weird RSS feed or something of
Yeah,
updates.
you got to scroll down to 2145 to get back to the Russia stuff.
This is annoying. Okay. 2123, 2129. They're talking about Trump and grand jury, Secretary of Defense. Okay. Heightened alert. We've got the.
It's like the minutes for the
This is
broadcast
annoying.
or something.
I don't like what they're doing here.
Here, do you want to?
We should just get a regular article.
I thought this was a regular article. I didn't
No,
know
it's
this was a minutes list of the news feed.
No,
The
that's
news
I think
broadcast or
exactly
something.
what this is.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
That is so annoying. All right,
Okay.
this is bad. We need a better article.
Okay. Well, I think the next one technically has to do with Russia and Ukraine too. I mean, there's not
Mhm.
like we can get into it here. It's more.
Yeah,
of the,
well, I mean, there's stuff happening today. Why don't you read about the cyber attacks while I look for something else?
The COVID-19 crisis would be seen as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber pandemic. Russia.
Okay, yeah, enough Russia there. This is ABC News. DHS warns of Russian cyber attack on U.S. if it responds to Ukraine invasion. It feels like they're just setting up for the big switch to turn off, the internet switch.
Mhm.
As tensions rise in the standoff over Ukraine, the Department of Homeland Security has warned that the U.S. response to a possible Russian invasion could result in a cyber attack launched against the U.S. by the Russian government or its proxies. Quote, we assess that Russia would consider initiating a cyber attack against the homeland if it perceived a U.S. or NATO response to a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine threatened its long-term national security, a DHS intelligence and analysis bulletin sent to law enforcement agencies around the country and obtained by ABC News said. The bulletin was dated January 23rd, 2022. Russia DHS said has a, quote, Russia, DHS said, has a, quote, range of offensive cyber tools that it could deploy against U.S. networks. And the attacks could range from a low-level denial of service attack to destructive attacks targeting critical infrastructure. Quote, we assess that Russia's threshold for conducting disruptive or destructive cyber attacks in the homeland probably remains very high, and we have not observed Moscow directly employ these types of cyber attacks against U.S. critical infrastructure, notwithstanding cyber espionage and potential pre-positioning operations in the past, the bulletin said. Last year, cybercriminals based in Russia caused two of the most destructive cyber attacks in recent history, the U.S. has said. Colonial Pipeline was the victim of a ransomware attack in May 2021, shutting down operations and causing widespread outages across the country, and meat supplier JBS had its operation shut down due to Russian-based hackers, or so we were told.
Yeah,
Didn't know
right.
it was Russia.
It's funny that they're just
said
sort
it.
of, yeah. That was the thing with a lot of the hacks happening at the time, which was coincidentally right when when Klaus came out and started talking about the cyber pandemic.
Yeah.
They were, it was disputed whether these were Russia-based hackers or if they were just proxying through Russia.
Just some Russian
it could
IP
have literally
addresses.
been anybody who proxied through Russia.
Yeah. Plus, wasn't the whole spyware, Pegasus spyware, wasn't that all? That was all coming out last year too, and they didn't associate that with any of these hacks here.
No, not that I remember.
But they could have had something to do with each other. Russia, back to the article, is also responsible for the SolarWinds breach in late 2020, the U.S. has said, where the U.S. says Russia-backed cyber criminals gained access to 10 U.S. government agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Commerce. Well, if they actually got a hold of it, then everything you've been saying, as the U.S. has said, could be Russian propaganda, just so you know, ABC News.
Yeah.
DHS says Russia, quote, continues to target and gain access to critical infrastructure in the U.S., but Russia does not limit itself to conducting cyber operations just in the U.S. The bulletin said in 2015 and 2016, Russian military intelligence assets launched a cyber attack against Ukraine's power grid. Although the bulletin doesn't mention it, Ukrainian officials most recently pointed the finger at Russia for another cyber outage, shutting down government websites. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas told reporters last week that the U.S. is on a, quote, heightened alert for cyber attacks given geopolitical landscape. He told reporters at the U.S. Conference of Mayors on Thursday that it is, quote, difficult to calibrate the likelihood of something happening. Quote, the whole point is when the specter of harm arises, we call for vigilance, and quite frankly, in the cybersecurity arena, ever-present vigilance is what we call for, he said. Another word for we need more surveillance and data gathering of all cyber activity.
Need it. Must have.
We must have it. We got to fight against the Russians. Give us your data to protect you. Okay, did you find something for the
Yeah, I'm looking at this is a USA Today sort of big rundown. It also includes some of the more recent things. So I think we can go from this.
Okay.
Through the archive there for you.
Yeah.
Because USA Today is a paywall for some reason.
Yeah.
Here's a headline. Putin, and this is kind of the most recent fear-mongering going on about this. Putin won't stop with Ukraine. Why Americans should care about Russia's aggression against its neighbor. Because we've been seeing a lot of this. Like, okay, why do we care so much about Ukraine? There's a big, movement, a sort of non-interventionary attitude. Like, why do we care so much about Ukraine? Why do we care so much about whatever? And I understand arguments on either side of it. But I think it's important to note what how the media wants us to feel. Remember, human beings are very reactive to feeling how people want them to feel, and that's kind of the whole point of corporate news media propaganda. So let's see how the news wants us to feel about this. Like I said, the headline, Putin won't stop with Ukraine, why Americans should care about Russia's aggression against its neighbor. The U.S. was still deep in diplomatic discussions with Russia over the crisis in Ukraine when President Joe Biden succinctly summed up what's at stake.
Where's the quote?
I know. They don't actually give a quote. Well, they do. Here it is. Another Russian invasion of the former Soviet Republic would be, quote, the most consequential thing that's happened in the world in terms of war and peace since World War II. That's a pretty big statement there, Biden.
Yeah, it's almost as the same as COVID being the 9/11.
The most, yes, the 9/11, yeah. Or more like January 6th.
Or January 6th is 9/11.
A 9/11 style thing. Yeah, and to keep in mind, okay, so what is the most consequential thing that's happened in the world in terms of war and peace since World War II, Biden said. So he's saying the Russian invasion of Ukraine is more consequential than, well, I don't know, the Vietnam War,
the Korean
War in
War,
Afghanistan, the Korean War, like, and those are just our wars. There's wars going on all the time that aren't even ours. And he's saying that Russia invading Ukraine is more consequential than that. Now, why? What's the hidden context in there? The hidden context in there is, oh, you thought things were bad during the Vietnam War or the Korean War, you know, when like large portions of that generation had to be shipped off and fight other countries. He's sort of signaling here that, like, yeah, a bunch of a bunch of Americans are going to have to go off and fight Russians right now, or could, is kind of the underlying thing he's talking about, which is completely ludicrous. Well, let's see what else he says. Biden's analysis, delivering
yummy
analysis delivered during a White House news conference in January spelled out in stark terms why Americans should care about the fate of the Eastern European nation that's roughly the size of Texas and is known for golden sunflowers, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, and being the spark for Donald Trump's first impeachment saga.
Oh, gosh.
Notice how they don't mention Hunter Biden's main employer at a Ukrainian, oil company, where Hunter Biden, Biden's son, was sat on the board of a oil company for no reason and made $50,000 a month and had emails talking about how some of that money was being sent to the big guy, presumably Biden.
Yeah.
Okay.
His father.
Don't need to mention that Ukrainian info, but just the Donald Trump thing and Chernobyl. The latest conflict is rooted in Russian President Vladimir Putin's desire to reestablish the influence that Russia wielded under the Soviet Empire. Foreign policy experts say the U.S. in turn wants to keep Russian aggression in check while working to strengthen a struggling democracy that has become more closely aligned with the West. Yes, Biden must defend his son's business interests in the Ukraine. And just not to have to review the whole thing, but it's something like half of Congress is involved with business interests in the Ukraine. Yeah. So it makes sense that they would be setting up this, the foundation to go protect Ukraine because Russia bad. And not to mention that, half of Congress has a lot of interest in Ukraine maintaining its Western connections, especially business connections. The U.S. has already spent billions of dollars to help Ukraine build up its military defenses, an investment that's likely to escalate dramatically if Russia invades. While Biden has said the U.S. would not send troops to help defend Ukraine against Russian forces, he said the U.S. would likely send more American forces to other Eastern European countries, including Poland and Romania. Then it goes into
Romania, Scotland, Albania. Go ahead.
Nice. Then it goes into kind of a subheading that says the spark for wider war. And it kind of gives the whole background of Ukraine and its independence from the Soviet Union and this and that. It's, that kind of thing. But this is where it gets to the super scary part. You have to keep in mind, Gonz. Russia won't stop with Ukraine. A Russian invasion of Ukraine would spread fear across the region and would almost certainly lead to a further buildup of NATO forces in other Eastern European countries, foreign policy experts warn. Quote, if the Russians succeed in reestablishing a sphere of influence or of dominating Ukraine, they won't stop there. They will continue, Taylor said. The Poles and the Romanians, the Czechs, will be very concerned as they see Russian tanks coming west from Russia into Ukraine toward them, and they will ask for reinforcements from the United States. A successful Russian invasion of Ukraine, Taylor said, could embolden Russia to be more aggressive in other areas, such as cyber attacks, election meddling, and influence campaigns designed to undermine Western democracies.
Almost like they're setting them up to be the culprits of a destruction of Western democracies.
And I really do not see the connection between them, perpetrating a military invasion of Ukraine and hacking. Like,
right.
Why would they feel more comfortable hacking now that they have a military invasion of Ukraine? I don't see how they're connected, but it's just a good way to bring that up.
Everything's scary.
Other U.S. adversaries also will be watching to see whether the Biden administration and its NATO allies will follow through with their warnings to answer a Russian invasion with devastating economic sanctions and additional shipments of weapons to Ukraine and other Eastern European countries. Quote, NATO and the U.S. credibility are on the line, says Will Pomerantz, acting director of the Wilson Center Keenan Institute, a think tank dedicated to Russian and Eurasia research. Quote, and if they fail, that will be taken by China and other adversaries as a willingness by the West to defend its interest.
Unwillingness, yeah.
Right. Let me do that again. Quote, and if they fail, that will be taken by China and other adversaries as an unwillingness by the West to defend its interests. And it goes on and on and on about Putin and stuff like that.
Puts the U.S. in a tough spot there.
Yeah, well,
but
that's
maybe it was
kind of
meant to.
Exactly. And that's kind of, notice not a lot of mention of the pipeline. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Not a lot, not once.
Not a single mention of the pipeline, which is sort of the biggest
infrastructure, the actual tangible stuff.
Yeah, which is set to deliver natural gas from Russia to Europe, specifically starting with Germany. And Russia can't do that without opening up some of these geographical locations. Poland has already made a very strong stance that they're not going to let this Russian pipeline come through. I haven't seen a specific quote from Romania about that, but I have to assume they're on similar footing. I know Latvia and Lithuania and that whole area has no interest in letting the Russians build a pipeline for their own economic gain at the cost of these, smaller former Soviet states. But you really have the Central Europeans, the Germans, and I think the French stand to gain from the pipeline. There's a couple other countries who are on the list where they're like, we don't really care about you, Poland and other former Soviet states. Thank you for being the barrier between us and Russia for so very long. But just let a little bit of Russia in, please, so we can have all their gas. And that's really been the big problem. And that's another thing about this Ukraine issue that does not get brought up a lot. It's an economic move to be able to, have very strong economic ties with Central Europe. And Germany was sort of letting it happen for the longest time. But apparently Biden is such a skilled diplomat that he changed their mind. Blah, blah, blah. We'll see. Sorry. Meow, meow, meow. We'll see.
Meow, meow, meow. I am curious why Newsweek pulled the article that they had. U.S. may face cyber attacks if Russia aid Ukraine deemed threatening. And Newsweek just deleted the article. So, interesting.
Did they?
Yeah.
I wonder why.
Yeah, me too.